news of the world. But before it was shut down, we opened it up in our millions every Sunday. Has our appetite for scandal caused this one? Good morning, welcome to Sunday Morning Live. Here's a question for you. Why did the hacks on the News of the World think private information was what we wanted to hear? Are we to blame for what they did? It's the big morality tale this week, and this is your chance to take on the journalists yourselves. And with hypocrisy on our minds, is it wrong to fake religious belief to get your kids into a good school? Our guests are all headline makers this morning. You can read Peter Hitchens' column today in the Mail on Sunday alongside pages of celebrity gossip. But he quit the Express because he couldn't stomach its new owner's other publishing interests. Paul McMullen, ex-News of the World, is a biter who got bit. Actor Hugh Grant secretly filmed him fessing up to phone hacking. And Derek Hatton was hounded for 15 years by more than Murdoch's men. He was the militant Liverpool lefty the whole media loved to hate. Well, we want to know what you think this morning. You can talk to our guests on webcam, on Skype. This is your chance to give your views as well on Twitter or by phone. Calls cost up to 5 pence a minute from a BT landline. Calls from mobiles and other networks may cost considerably more. And texts will be charged at your standard message rate. So did you take to your high horse when you heard about the News of the World this week? Or did you take a good look at yourself? The paper might have been hacking people's phones, but millions read the stories. Peter here thinks if you bought it, you deserve it. Do you agree? Today is the death knell of the News of the World, mourned by its staff and perhaps by up to 7 million readers.
It's a paper that's been part of British culture for 168 years. And frankly, I think we've been a witch hunt of victims of a witch hunt by some newspapers, and I hope they're happy today as they dance on the grave of a British institution.
But many say that institution has betrayed the nation's trust by hacking the phones of murder victims and the families of dead soldiers. Even though we knew it was illegal, there was hardly an outcry when we discovered the tabloids hacked into celebrities' phones. In fact, the gossip was lapped up.
It's been hard to make large portions of the population really care about it in a sort of visceral way because so many of the victims of phone hacking were rich or famous or whatever.
Violating the privacy of murder victims, it seems, was a step too far. But before we cast the first stone, could the tabloid hacking scandal be our own fault? After all, the tabloids have bent and broken the law for decades. Often they're uncovering genuine political scandals and bringing down the powerful and hypocritical. But they've also destroyed families and dredged gutters for celebrity gossip, and the public have loved every minute of it. So can we complain if they break the law to give us the gory gossip we crave? Only this week, our two biggest tabloids were slapped with contempt of court charges over coverage of Joanna Yates's murder. But those details fascinated the public and sold millions and millions of papers. Some say the reason we find ourselves in this situation is that the press viewed itself as above the law, and a toothless regulator, which could now face the chop as well, wasn't taming the beast. But all newspapers are fighting to survive because we're buying fewer and fewer papers, and they're trying to compete with rumour and gossip on social networking sites, which aren't governed by the same laws as the press. So can we blame them for providing us with the scandal we queue up to buy? Many argue that the cornerstone of democracy is a free press, that tabloids hold up a mirror to our own values. So should we abuse them for sinking into the gutter and perhaps dragging some police and politicians with them? Or is our own appetite for sleaze to blame? Is it, Paul?
I think it is, actually. Funnily enough, I was in a cab coming here, and the cabbie said, all this phone hacking, it's dreadful, isn't it? And I said, well, do you buy the paper? And he said, well, to be honest, since you stopped doing all that, there's not much in it anymore. So, you know.
So he doesn't? Well,
he doesn't know, because we don't, you know. It's not as as hard-hitting, as it used to be. It's not as subversive, possibly not as interesting.
Well, that's the question for our text vote this morning. Is an immoral press our fault? If you think it is, text the word vote followed by yes. If you think it isn't, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771 and texts will be charged at your standard message rate. For full terms and conditions, visit bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live and we'll show you how you voted at the end of the programme. Is that the case, Peter, that the papers have to do it because the readers demand it?
It's not as simple as that. I think that you have to put into this that this country has gone through a huge educational decline and a huge moral decline in the past 50 years. And that at the same time you had the enormous influence of Rupert Murdoch, a man who was quite prepared to exploit this to the utmost, and who actually forced a lot of other papers to follow him down that path. You sound
like you're absolving journalists of any responsibility.
I'm not absolving them of anything. Everybody's responsible for their own actions. I'm explaining, not absolving, but I'm saying if you want to know why this has happened, you look at the News of the World of, say, 50 years ago, it's mostly about trial reports of particular murders, usually domestic murders, and now it's all about scandal and celebrity gossip. These things are not the same. And in fact, one of the interesting things about the last edition of the News of the World is it produces a museum of the British press, which shows just how totally different popular newspapers were. Far more literate, far more wordy, far more full of actual information than they are now. There's been a transformation, and to pretend that the newspapers
circulations have dropped.
Circulations have dropped recently, though only very recently. I tend to think the reasons why circulations are dropping is because of the fall in educational standards and the fact that reading is falling out of fashion as an entertainment. How many people under 30 read for pleasure anymore because of the takeover of electronic media?
Derek,
there are lots of pressures. I'm not offering an excuse. I'm saying this, if you want to seek an explanation, you can't just say it's the papers. And people have developed appetites for things which the papers are sought to satisfy. The basic problem that remains this: if you want to have a free press, it has to be independent. To be independent, it has to be commercially successful. To be commercially successful, it has to be popular. To be popular, it has to have something to do with taste.
Because these things are popular, we buy them in our droves.
I think you've got to remember that big companies spend billions every year on advertising. They employ advertising agents, they employ experts, they employ consultants to advertise. Once they advertise, they make money and we buy the products. If that didn't work, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't spend their billions. Now, I'm sure that if an advert on page 53, halfway down, is going to convince us to buy the product, then certainly headline after headline after headline is going to make us buy the product. So the newspapers have a massive influence in the way we think.
If we took out the celebrity gossip and the stuff which is based on the allegedly illegal methods, would we still buy these papers? Would we have a taste for the alternative?
I don't think it's just the sleaze, to be honest.
Because Paul says that, the cabbies, or a cabbie, says that it's not the same without it.
Yeah, I mean, you meet another cabbie tomorrow, you'll say the opposite. I mean, I don't think it's just the sleaze thing, it's everything. I mean, the famous comment from the worst gutter rag that's ever hit the face of this country, the Sun, actually said it was the Sun what won it. Now, they were very proud to say, we actually influence people to vote in a particular way. But when it goes wrong, oh no, it's your fault. You can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it. There's an old saying that you are what you eat. Well, I think you equally, you are what you eat in terms of the propaganda as well.
That's not really true, because every now and then, let's say once a month, the News of the World has done a really credit-worthy story. I think Naming and Shaming, which I remember writing and was quite proud of that, conceivably by putting a picture of a paedophile there may have saved a child's life, because people here and maybe one or two children. So, but the next week we have a Premiership footballer has 3 in a bed, whatever, and why one is important for the other is that you need to sell 5 million copies in order that when you have a genuine political scandal, people will actually read it. If you only sold sort of 100 copies, then no one would know that, for example, the Deputy Prime Minister had been lying to his wife and to the electorate. So you need the tittle-tattle, the titillating nonsense, if you like.
Do you think people wouldn't buy the paper just to read those political
well, no, if you
stories.
want to read that kind of thing, you buy the Independent. And how many people buy the Independent? Hardly anybody.
But the only reason people that is true, but the only reason that is true is that over the years that the likes of Murdoch have pumped billions and billions into ensuring that we are actually convinced that what we want to read is the sleaze and everything else. I mean, you know, in real terms, how many people would rather think about Ryan Giggs or anybody else in terms of their sporting prowess rather than what they did outside? I mean, you know, Tiger Woods, I used to love watching him play golf. All of a sudden, the press did this big thing on the women that he had. Suddenly, I can't watch him playing golf. And I'm sorry, in real terms, I'd rather watch him play golf than read about the women that he's been with.
Is that the media's fault or Tiger Woods' fault?
It was totally the media's fault because, OK, he has got to apologise to his wife, but he hasn't got to apologise to me. I don't care. All I want to do is watch him play golf.
Peter?
Well, I'm sorry, I know nothing about golf. I couldn't dream of getting involved in it. But I just think that the question is being made too simple, and also you have to remember in this that it is true that if you published a newspaper purely composed of important political stories, not that many people would read it. And it's, if you look, for instance, at the Murdoch empire, the Times, I don't think has made any money in modern history. And it's been subsidized heavily by Mr. Murdoch's other papers. And we get a very powerful and an important, serious newspaper financed by popular journalism, which is a very strong argument for having popular journalism alongside it. No, you couldn't, I don't think, have a major popular press. It's unique to this country. It's unique to this country to have a national popular press that is also influential in politics. And it's one of those things that actually keeps our politics, although it's not perfect, immensely cleaner than the politics of almost any other country you care to name.
I wonder why you say the Times is a powerful, important paper, when clearly it is. I quite like it, but nonetheless, the Sun...
That's why I say it is.
The Sun is much more powerful because what's the readership of that? It's about 7 million. The readership of the Times is, you know, a tiny amount.
Yeah, but the point is the one actually couldn't function without the other because,
so actually,
the one they're cross-subsidized.
It's not the reader's fault then. It's business. This is a business problem because they need multi-million selling tabloids in order to fund their other business interests. Is that your point?
To say it's the reader's fault is a bit like saying it's not our fault that we aren't responsible for what we do. We are responsible for what we do, and we should take responsibility for it. Hang on just a second, because there's another half of this point that needs to be made. What it is true to say is that the readers have changed, and the readers have changed because our society has changed immensely, and in my view, very, very much for the worse.
You can't say you've had no influence on that, Peter. Well, I mean, newspapers year after year, decade after decade, have made a difference. Not only in terms of what they write as journalists, but the way they behave. And 25 years ago, 6,000 print workers were thrown out of News International. The very same journalists, or their forefathers, were bussed in across picket lines to actually produce newspapers, which were going to then decry those people. And now we're supposed to feel sorry for those journalists who actually leave their jobs. Well, yes, I am. They've got a mortgage to pay tomorrow. But at the same time, they were bussed in against 6,000 print workers. Now, I'm sorry, they have to take some responsibility. Well, I might do, by the way. If you carry on talking the way you are.
This has nothing to do with the subject under discussion. Absolutely nothing whatever to do.
But what role?
I'm not making out a great moral case for myself. I've done what I can.
You decry a decline in standards.
Absolutely,
in education, in morals, in society. And perhaps Derek's point is, to what extent does your paper and other papers mould that?
Well, I think to a great extent we try to fight against it. And I think one of the reasons why I now work for the paper that I work for, as opposed to the one I used to work for, is because I care quite considerably about that.
Dr. Paul Taylor...
That is Daily Mail.
Actually, it's the Mail on Sunday. I have to keep explaining this to people. They are separate newspapers, but I'm not decrying the Daily Mail. I just happen to work for the Mail on Sunday, which is a separate newspaper.
Dr. Paul Taylor, to what extent are the media the moulders of society's morals?
I think it's more a question of the background to it all, which is the lack of or loss of professionalism in journalism. Now, I think journalists are the symptom, they're not the disease. And I think the other contributors have talked around the issue about the massive marketization. Everything's a commodity. And if you think about why aren't journalists professional anymore, because it's come out in your discussion, they're always trying to give what they think the readers will buy or what they're told to do by their business owners. Now, I think true professionalism requires more of a sense of objectivity and independent values. And journalists don't have those independent values anymore. They've been taken over by the market.
Peter?
Well, I think that's simply untrue. There are huge numbers of journalists who have independent values and stand up for them and state them in their newspapers. In fact, if you want to find a spectrum of independent critical opinion, a very, very broad and combative one, you'll have to look a long way to find anything better than you will find in the huge variety of the competitive independent British press. And I'm not saying that we're perfect, but on that basis, it is extremely good.
Paul?
So why I challenge all viewers, open up a newspaper and do a content analysis of how much of it's personality driven, how much of it's celebrity driven. If it's about American foreign policy, there'll be a segment on what Condoleezza Rice was wearing, what Michelle Obama's wearing. It's not about concepts, it's not about factual information. Journalists are now part of the entertainment industry. They're not conceptual writers or broadcasters.
To an extent, you're part of the entertainment industry yourself by appearing on this program, but that doesn't mean that what you're saying is invalidated by that. We all have to get our views across in a way which appeals to people. Doesn't mean that the views can't be honestly stated and don't have integrity. Or in that case, what are you doing here?
Insofar as I'm able to talk with you, it's in this medium of sound bites, and yes, I'm as guilty as you are. We have to talk in sound bites, but I'm not kidding myself that anything you or I are saying is particularly conceptually profound or well developed, because we're working within this medium.
I think quite hard about what I say.
Andy Flanagan is director of the Christian Socialist Movement. If media magnates are selling us what we want, is it us that lack self-control?
I think we do need to take a long, hard look at ourselves. It's been a time when we've been blaming other people. You've been blaming bankers, blaming politicians, now blaming the media. It's been said the axis of evil runs straight through the heart of every individual. We all need to take a long, hard look at ourselves. And the reality is we live in a time now where we're more likely to know about the private lives that appear in neighbours in the soap opera than our actual neighbours. A few years ago, Robbie Williams said, "Let me entertain you." And we all sat down passively and said, "Yeah, okay, fine, thanks very much." And it's almost inevitable that if we believe our only interaction with society is through the medium of the market as consumers, that we will struggle, we will get hit, we will be just simply passive. And there are some great examples recently of folks who are standing up and saying, well, no, we're not just consumers. You look at Mumsnet, you look at London Citizens, you look at churches up and down the country, keep coming together to say, no, community is more than just about receiving. It's about giving as well.
Graham Shear, you're a commercial litigator. You represent victims of phone hacking. When people read about all of these allegations, they were very shocked. But of course, they'd read the stories as well. Is it hard to blame them, though, when that material's dangled in front of them?
Well, I believe that our popular tabloid media have, since Fleet Street moved out of Fleet Street, slowly but surely weaned the public onto a sugary sweet diet of sensationalist reporting in order to sell more newspapers. And that sort of straightforward monetizing of sensationalist stories was proved to sell the papers, and therefore slowly and gradually we were directed towards what would sell more papers in order to fulfill the business model that the various newspaper groups decided would be more effective for them in reducing their newsroom staffs and buying in cheap pre-packaged stories from various suppliers. And I think that's probably the source of the situation we now find ourselves in, where newspapers like the News of the World, and I don't think they're alone, but newspapers like the News of the World have found a business model that produced a very stark and clear return on their investment for the cheapest cost.
Paul?
Well, I'm a journalist.
And a former News of the World journalist, of course.
Yeah, and I simply keep the journal of the day. I just go out and see things and talk to people, then I write it all down. I mean, that's the Sun there, but equally...
You've got a choice about what you cover, though, haven't you?
Well, yes and no, but I was going to say the Daily Mirror, it is a mirror of our times. We don't make it up, we just see what is there and then we write about it. The thing that's, I suppose I've been doing it for about 20 years now, and I've done quite a lot of kiss and tells, where the girl, does a story about the guy, the footballer, or the celebrity. And I've actually been quite shocked. I know we're in Northern Ireland, which is quite puritanical sometimes this morning, but just it's almost, there is no shame. I mean, I was doing a story with one girl, and I remember she said, do you want me to tell you about how I had sex with my brother? And I thought, my God, are you sure you want me to write all that down in the paper? And she said, oh yeah, no, I want to be in the paper like that. I thought, what? So it didn't add to the story anyway. And,
Did you write it?
No, it didn't. Funnily enough, that particular angle of that story didn't matter. But one I did write fairly recently was, who was it about? I don't want to sort of libel anyone. No, it was about one guy.
We certainly don't want you to libel anybody on the
That's
programme.
the first News of the World's journalist saying that.
Someone in Big Brother, and it was a guy this time, had had a three in a bed with two girls. And I mean, they were quite sweet. They had nice families, fairly middle class. And they were just, the details that they were prepared to tell me, that I was just writing down. I mean, it was so intimate, you'd think their mothers, have you no shame?
But I'm sorry, they didn't wake up, those girls, I'm sorry, Paul, but those girls and that fella, they didn't wake up one morning and thought, I'll tell you what, we've got a great idea here. The reason why
they said, can we have 10 grand, please?
Yeah, exactly. The reason why they got into that position is because they've seen newspaper after newspaper after newspaper, year after year, decade after decade, particularly since the whole sort of whopping thing started, where they've actually seen that that's what you do today in order to get a few quid. That's what you do. And because they've seen things do it, if that hadn't have happened in the past, they wouldn't have talked to you like that. They wouldn't have even known they could have had 10 grand for it.
Has anybody noticed, though, a part of this discussion, you mentioned Big Brother, and we've mentioned footballers, and no doubt we'll be mentioning various show business people. This is not just a matter of newspapers. Newspapers didn't invent Big Brother. Television invented Big Brother. And the modern football industry was invented largely by television, and indeed stoked up very much by satellite TV. And this whole business of football millionaires, to blame this on the press is, I think, absurd. The other thing is, look,
the press makes an awful lot of money out of programmes like Big Brother, though, doesn't it? Because of all the interest in those individuals
yes, but that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that newspapers operate within a society in which other things happen, which the newspapers can't necessarily control. The other thing is here is quite rightly people are getting very exercised about people hacking into their phones, and particularly about some of the instances which are now being exposed. But remember, what is the power in this country which can actually record all your phone calls and listen to all your phone calls? It's the government. And they are the people who are ultimately a far greater threat to people's privacy than anything the press can do. And if you have a weak, enfeebled press, as they do on most of the European continent, for instance, you have a more powerful government. Be very, very careful before getting involved in a kind of stampede of hatred against the press. If you end up having a muzzled, tame press, you'll have an unregulated government.
I just want to go back to the monetisation of these stories. And Paul, if you hadn't been offering money, do you think you would have got the same access, the same level of detail?
No, actually, 100%, because I know they were booking a holiday. I think they wanted to go to Ibiza, and it was like, no, we need a bit more, because it was like, I remember saying, this isn't very good, this is only worth a couple of grand. And they went, oh, okay, well, maybe we did it 5 times a night. And I said, what, is that all? And I remember we got to some ludicrous figure of, oh, we did it 17 times a night. And I said, you're just making it up now, aren't you? And,
well, how can you tell the difference if people are incentivised by the money?
And does it matter?
Well, I mean, it's a big carrot to dangle. Here's 10 grand if it's a great story, and it's only worth 500 quid if you didn't do very much.
So, Graham Shear, if you're still with us, is that part of the problem, the money that's involved?
It certainly is. I'm sitting here shaking my head, listening to what Paul is saying, and it's so clear that they're dangling the cash in front of these girls and manipulating them in order to do their kiss and tells. And this is all part of the business model, to promote the newspaper and to get the girls to reveal more and more. And yet he sits there, surprised that they would embellish or lie, because that's what they're doing about the story, and then willingly publishing a story which is not only a breach of privacy for the person to whom
no, actually, he loved it. The Big Brother guy loved it, if he can hear me.
Oh, I can hear you, Paul, but I'm always worried about the sort of things that you say, because you try and rationalise and justify what are clear
The guy living his life in public, and two girls say he did it 17 times a night. He felt fantastic, actually.
Graham?
You know, once again, a News of the World journalist seeking to justify their role in enlightening the public on something that we really don't need to know about. I mean, you know, yes, you dangle the money, but the responsibility, that one word seems to evade you. And that is the problem that is the cause, or the root of the cause of the News of the World at the moment. They lost sight of where the line was drawn between exercise of an accountable responsibility and the sale of newspapers.
Well, let's speak to some...
That's a problem.
Sorry to cut across you, Graham. Let's speak to Neil Hamilton, who had a horrific experience at the hands of some papers, false accusations made against you. Would eliminating money for stories help, Neil?
Well, the case to which you refer was my wife and I were both accused of participating in a rape, which was completely untrue. And the girl who made up these allegations and subsequently was sent to prison for perjury and perverting the courts of justice, sold her story to the News of the World via Max Clifford for £50,000. She was entitled to anonymity, of course, as an alleged victim of sex offence, but she sold that anonymity to the News of the World for money. And so money is at the bottom of a lot of these problems. And we all know that when people have got a story to sell, a newspaper will decide, oh, well, this isn't sexy enough, let's sex it up. And so that's what happens very often. Take the famous case of David Bella and Antonio Sancho, who was supposed to have had sex with her in a Chelsea football school. I mean, that was completely untrue. The sex was true, but the lurid detail, which provided the headline for the newspaper, was totally untrue. The true responsibility with the editors and the journalists.
Neil, I'm going to have to interrupt you there simply because we have a little bit of breakup on the line and we're in danger of telling only half of the story.
Funnily enough, that story came from a phone hack. Oh, am I giving something away there? Anyway, I'm not sure if I am. But anyway, that's fine. Probably won't say that.
I think what's emerging more and more here, and Paul almost admitted it, is that he sat down there with the girl and said, hang on a minute, I need more. If you give me more, I'll give you more money. Give me more, I'll give you more money. So somewhere along the line, the truth goes, or it's so distorted, it becomes not the truth anymore. That's what you've just said. And by the way, I'm not surprised at that. And it's not just you, it's everywhere. That's what's happening all the time. People are actually been, over years and years and years and years, people actually have been seeing stories that have been totally distorted, where the truth is almost unrecognisable. But in the past, either one, the sort of law didn't exist, or two, they didn't have the money to go to court.
These things go on, and I personally dislike them. It's not the sort of journalism that I do, or that I like, or that I want to read, and quite a lot of other people feel the same way. But then, on the other hand, if you want to ask how did the MP's expenses scandal get exposed, I think you'll find some money changed hands over that. And it's not always as simple as you'd like it to be. And if you have an independent press, it's sometimes going to do things that you don't like, but if it's independent, then that's the way it's going to be. And if you don't want an independent press, then see how you like the kind of society you have,
Do you really believe it's independent?
Power is not called into account. It's not as independent as I would like it to be, but it's a good deal more independent than any other national press that I can think of anywhere in the world.
Roy Greenslade joins us. Roy, I beg your pardon, we do not have Roy Greenslade at the moment, but we are hoping to get him just a moment. Yes, Paul.
I'll make a quick point if you like. I remember, you remember the Sunday Sport, it recently went out of business. I think it came back again. But I remember in the early 90s, it was really popular with very silly stories, you know, bus found on the moon, and then the next week, bus found on the moon, wheel clamped. But that particular edition sold 500,000 copies, which was more than the Independent and the Observer combined. So, you know, what does that say about the people who are buying the product?
It says something pretty distressing about the level of education interest in our society. But then I think if there's one thing I'd say that Fleet Street has really, really failed in over the past 50 years, it's in campaigning to do something serious about our state education system. Which is
I want to ask a couple of questions. Peter, have you ever done anything illegal to get a story?
No. I did once steal Elena Ceausescu's personal file from the presidential palace in Bucharest, which I suspect was illegal, but nobody minded at the time.
So you have done
She
something.
wasn't among us.
You have done something illegal to get a story.
Under Romanian communist law, I think it probably would have been a serious offence, yeah, but I'm prepared to own up to it.
And Peter, I mean, Paul,
Have I?
you've been very honest about
I've got a
the
lawyer
kind
now
of
telling
pressure
me,
that
stop
you've.
implicating yourself or you're going to get arrested. So, but anyway, so what was the question?
Are you concerned about being arrested?
I am actually, yeah. I haven't been home for about 5 days, and hence I'm still wearing the same suit. Sorry, Steve Coogan, who pointed it out. If you only got one suit, no, I've got more than that, but I just haven't been home to pick it up. The police have asked me into Scotland Yard, not as a witness, to arrest me. Yeah, they said, come into Scotland. They didn't just say, come in voluntarily. It was like, you will come in tomorrow. And I said, will I? Well, I don't think I will. So I haven't. And but
They have asked you to come in tomorrow,
well,
or
no,
they have previously asked you to come in?
They have. I've now had 3 requests to go to Scotland Yard to be interviewed under caution, which would require them arresting me as soon as I walk through the door. And I'm staying away, actually, so I don't think I've done anything that deserves arrest. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I broke the law lots and lots, because they're just going to listen to the tape and say, well, look, you admitted it there. But all I've ever tried to do is to write well-researched and truthful articles about what is going on in the world around me. And, you know, it sounds a bit flippant, what better way to get to the truth than to hear it from the horse's mouth, perhaps on their own messages.
Derek, final comment?
I just think that's a cracking line, that I'm actually not going to see them because I don't think I should be arrested. I mean, I think if anybody else in any other walk of life would say that, they wouldn't last for 5 minutes. But for some reason, journalists get away with it.
Because
it's another example. You know,
we're just trying to do something that's good. Why should you be arrested because you've strayed into a grey area to do something that's good?
All these years. That's the thing about
exposing corruption in councils that which you would know all too well about.
You have to ask me who I was before. So you start saying, "Oh, exposing corruption." You didn't even know who I was or what I'd done.
Well,
so
it's changed a bit.
Don't now
go more relaxed.
Don't go now making it all up. But sorry, you've done that all your life. Why change now?
Paul. Derek, we'll leave it there with Paul's circumstances hanging in the air. Is an immoral press our fault, is the question that we're asking this morning. It's our text poll. If you think it is our fault, text the word vote followed by yes. If you disagree, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771. Texts will be charged at your standard message rate. And you only have around 5 minutes before the poll closes. Later on Sunday Morning Live, would you lie about your religion to get your kids into a good school? And should you have to? We're going to speak to a vicar who says faking it's fine. It gives you, or gives her, a better chance of converting you. You can join in by webcam. You can make your views known by phone, by email, or online. But before we let Paul go to face the future, we're going to ask what else has been spinning our guests' moral compasses this week. Peter, you're worried about the funeral corteges of soldiers killed in Afghanistan.
Yes, because when the RAF-based Lynham closes in September, the dead coming back from Afghanistan will come instead through Brize Norton. And the route that's been proposed for the corteges to go to the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford now takes them away from any high street. They're simply routed through bypasses and suburban roads, whereas they could easily go through the town of Carterton, which is next to Brize Norton. I'm very suspicious as to why this is happening, and I think the government may be taking an opportunity here because they haven't really liked what's been happening at Wootton Bassett, which was a genuinely spontaneous demonstration of grief and respect. And I feel quite strongly that they should be held to account for this and asked repeatedly why it is that these processions will not in future be able to go down a high street.
There is an official explanation for that, which is that the route is too urban and would take in too many speed bumps, which would be inappropriate for funeral corteges. But you say that doesn't wash with you.
Well, there are speed bumps on the bypass route. And the Wootton Bassett route obviously went through narrow streets. It's actually a much shorter drive from Brize Norton to the hospital in Oxford than it was from Lynham, so there's no particular time constraint. I think almost every excuse that's put up for this, market traders in Carterton would object and so forth, has been knocked down in practice. I just have to say, if the government is going to have the nerve to send people off to get killed, then it oughtn't to have the nerve to try to do anything to prevent people expressing their grief over it when it happens.
Derek, there's a report out saying we're all going to have to work until we're 70. That got you frowning. Is it too long?
No, it got me frowning because I think that possibly we're going to have to work till a lot longer than 70. Not because anybody says so. I think that's an inevitability. I think I laugh at when a lot of people campaign the moment to say we shouldn't work till we're 66. Or I'm sorry, people in their 20s, 30s and 40s are going to have to work a lot longer. You know, 1 in 1,000 30 years ago we're going to reach 100. Now it's 1 in 100 we're going to reach 100. We're going to soon have millions of people 100 years old. And at the same time, you know, 1 in 3 10-year-olds are obese. You know, we're not going to be fit enough. The NHS is going to collapse. There are so many ways that people can keep fit these days. You know, there are gyms, there's the government's Bike to Work scheme, there's ways you can eat properly instead of eating crap. But at the same time, we still have this obesity. And I just can't believe that people who are saying, oh, well, I can't lose weight, I'm fat. Well, OK, some people can't, but the vast majority of them are lazy and greedy. That's the top and bottom of it. And people have got to be told very clearly that they're going to work longer, that they've got to be fitter in order to do that, for the sake of everybody. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the NHS is going to...
right-wing?
No, it's a bit realistic. And by the way, I don't mind. It's not about right or left. And again, that's probably typical news of the world. Journalists wanting to put a handle on it. It's not about putting a handle on it.
Derek, how long do you think you're going to be working until...
Oh, I want to work forever. I don't want to ever...
What, till you drop?
Yeah, without question.
Peter?
Well, I'd like to, but then I do understand there are a lot of people who do jobs which they would quite like to retire from. I'm very lucky. I have one of the best jobs in the world, and I don't want to stop doing it, but other people may. So I can't really preach to them about
Paul,
that.
under kind of pressure you're under, could you bear to carry on working until you're 80 or 90?
I retired at 40 and bought a pub, actually, so that's a different kind of work, but I still journalise every now and then. Obviously.
Meanwhile, you...
Even in the pub's working, isn't it?
Is it? I suppose it is, yeah. It's quite hard work, funnily enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Your moral moment this week was a strange reason for eviction.
Why do I have to do the silly one? But anyway.
Well,
right.
it's your choice.
Oh, yeah, well, I got it out of the sun, so, yeah, what was it, page 11? It was, oh, that's right, the man faces eviction for humming in his flat, yeah. So I've been practising how loud you can actually hum.
Is that as loud as you can do it?
I'm sure I can do it loud, but possibly not laughing.
Should it be
at
a
the
reason
same
to be evicted?
No, but you've got to say councillors are nuts sometimes, and they'll do anything to, you know, wave their little bit of power, you know. But it also reminds me of one of the last stories I wrote about Lisa Marie Presley, funnily enough, and it was in the press, so I can mention it. She had about 4 cleaners, a lot of cleaners going on there, and in their contracts, I saw the contracts, it said, you are forbidden from humming any of Elvis Presley's hits inside the house, and that made me laugh. So maybe humming is really annoying, so maybe you should be evicted for humming after all.
OK, interesting. On that note, you've been voting in our text poll this morning. We have been asking, is an immoral press our fault? The poll is now closing, so don't text, as your vote won't count, but you could still be charged, and we'll bring you the result at the end of the programme. Think of the fees, drop to your knees, a common catchphrase apparently at middle-class dinner parties these days. Some atheist parents are ditching the Dawkins, embracing Deuteronomy just to get their kids into a decent school. Confirmed atheist Derek Hatton here says you should do anything for your kids' education and the churches deserve it. Is he right? Should you lie for the sake of your children? Faith schools are some of the best and most popular in the country, and many parents will do anything to get their kids into them. Some atheist and agnostic parents are even prepared to drop to their knees and fake a faith if it gets their child a chance of a better future. Some of our most high-profile politicians say they're not religious, yet still send their children to faith schools.
Do you believe in God? No.
Many believers say it's rank hypocrisy to bow your head to a God you don't think exists, even for the sake of your child. Some faith schools include a wide range of pupils, but many church schools give places based on things like how often parents go to church, volunteering, and how early children are baptised. Some parents complain that makes it easier for rich families to get in, as they're able to give up more of their time. Yesterday, the church issued guidelines saying schools should admit more poor children from different faiths and races. Some parents say it's not fair you need faith to get your child through the door of the best church schools. And there's evidence that more mixed schools help stop racism and segregation. We all want the best for our children, but very few can afford to send them to private school. Does this make getting on your knees just to avoid the fees acceptable? What do you think? Should you fake faith for a good school? We're now joined by Reverend Joanna Jepson from the Church of England. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Paul has left the room, if not the building. You can join in by webcam or make your point by phone, text, email or online. Reverend Joanna Jepson, is it okay to fake faith? You're getting them through the door, I suppose.
I think actually what people are being asked to do isn't to fake faith so much as to attend and become part of a church. Certainly from where I'm sitting, Church of England, to get your children into the local Church of England school, parents need to attend the church, and it's not my place to be judging their motives for doing that.
So if, Derek Hatton, you're an atheist, if you had the chance of getting your children into a fantastic Ofsted outstanding rated school, would you go to church to do that?
I actually think if it wasn't so serious, it would all be very, very funny, this topic. Because you've got sort of a church which over the years have been losing numbers by their millions, and all of a sudden now, in the main, the only people who ever go to church are when they're born, they get married and they die. In fact, now the first two are even being ignored, and it's just when you die so they can pay the final premium of an insurance policy just in case. Now all of a sudden the church must think, at last there's a way of getting them back in, and the fact that they just don't care about the truth, just to get them through the doors, just so that they go to their schools.
That's
I'm sorry,
not accurate,
sorry, Joe. Just to finish. To answer your question, yes. If I had kids of that age, when the only good school was that church school, then as far as I'm concerned, I would just laugh at that church school. I'd laugh at the church and say, yes, I'll tell the lies, because it doesn't matter, because you've told lies all those decades.
I think it's not so much, I can't answer for other particular faiths, but where the Church of England is concerned, as the established faith of this country, the deal is that everybody in the country has a priest and a church. Now, we are there to minister to people of all faiths and no faith. It's not down to us, and it's not part of our ministry to say you can't be a part of this church. You know, if I was to judge the motives of anyone, including myself, on particular Sunday mornings in church,
does it offend you though that Derek says that not only would he come, he'd also laugh at the church in doing so?
Well, I think that says more about Derek's.
Well, can I ask you a question? I mean, actually, I don't know so much about Church of England schools, but I know for a fact many people I know who go to Catholic churches to play the game, and the Catholic Church knows very well that game is being played. They know very well the game is being played. That's why I don't think it says more about me. It does say more about the church, because the church is encouraging it. They're encouraging people. Because
can you remember? Let's remember to fulfil our ministry to the local community.
Peter, you're religious.
I'm in this difficulty. You know, Fleet Street columnist is more religiously concerned than vicar. How is it that you can be so relaxed about this? The problem with church schools is that they're good, and because they're good, they're oversubscribed, so they have to select in some way. And so what you're doing is you're saying in this process of selection, you're prepared to accept people who are, as far as you know or very much suspect, are pretending to be Christian believers, so that they can get their children into a better school. Now, here's the problem with this. The school is better because it is a Christian school. That's why it's better. And the people who are sending their child there know that, but they still say, oh, we ourselves, we're going to be atheists. We prefer atheism, even though the schools run on atheist principles, which are everywhere, are no good. They want to send their children to Christian schools. They want to ride free on the benefits of Christianity without believing in it. I think that's deeply unpleasant, and also it's so fundamentally bad.
Well, why don't you
to be dishonest in front of your children?
Why don't you talk to someone about that who did exactly that? Andrew Penman, you faked faith and wrote a book about it. You're atheist, your wife's agnostic. Isn't it hypocritical to want your children to go to a religious school?
I didn't want them to go to a religious school. I did fake being religious. I didn't enjoy a single second of it. And I say second, I went to church for 3 or 4 years. And I did so under duress, the reason being that if you open the door to the house in London where we live, then immediately the other side of the road was a state Anglican primary school. Half the places also went to people who were the children of Anglicans. In other words, it wasn't a community local school at all. It discriminated against the children of parents who weren't Anglican.
It discriminated in favour of the parents who were, which is a very different thing. It was a church school. You must remember these churches are there because the church set up those schools before the state could be bothered. That's why they're there in the first place.
The state still give 100% of the running costs to those church schools.
They do give the
exactly,
yes,
100%.
those running costs come from the taxes.
Exactly, they don't come from the churchgoers. They don't come from the churchgoers.
They come from
the people in this country.
Derek, can I finish a sentence?
Sorry,
they run the best.
Only because the others are not getting the results.
The taxes.
Stop! Everybody stop. It definitely helps if just one person speaks.
Peter, just you because I hadn't finished my sentence. The taxes come from Christians as well as from others. They're as entitled to have an education as anybody else. And it seems to me they're entitled to have Christian schools in a country whose laws, traditions, customs and morals are all based upon Christianity and on which you ride.
And it makes sense to invite people who are going to contribute at home to support what the schools are trying to give in terms of spiritual nourishment and personal development and the whole coherence that the faith message gives. And it makes sense to do that because actually if the faith communities don't do that, no one else will or indeed can.
Andrew, how did you fake your faith?
I went to church each Sunday. I just want to go back to one point that's been raised, which is a dangerous myth, the idea that faith schools are better than secular schools. Some are. Some faith schools are complete basket cases and should be shut down. So the idea that a school is good or bad because it's religious clearly, logically, is wrong. Otherwise, you wouldn't get awful state faith schools.
The subscription numbers actually speak for themselves, don't they?
But are these schools better, Joanna, because they're Christian, or are they better because they are oversubscribed and therefore they are able to select who they have through their doors?
I think they're oversubscribed because they are good and people recognise that there is a coherence to what is being offered that other schools don't provide. And
I'll mention something to you that the Bishop of Oxford said. Church schools need to remember what they're for, and they're not necessarily for nice, safe Christians in nice, safe places. They're supposed to be about offering
a ministry to everybody, and I agree.
And people of all faiths,
absolutely,
and local people like Andrew Penman, and not just local religious people.
Yes, quite. If I had my way, I would be saying, encouraging people parents to come to church, but not discriminating against the children and their families' faith. But for the teachers, I would insist that the teachers all subscribe to the faith. To make it a coherent place.
Do you think it's right, though?
Open it up to all children.
Do you think it's actually right that what I mentioned before is that the schools get 100% of their running costs from the government, and then they can turn around, as Andrew says, and demand that 50%. If they said, OK, 90% of the total cost going to the government, so they pay 10%. If they said 10% had to be from the church, then OK, you could argue that there was some sort of fairness there.
But to say 50%, the government doesn't have any money. Can I just make the government doesn't have any money? The money the government has comes from taxes from people, and it comes in many cases.
The majority of people in this country are not churchgoers, Peter.
That doesn't mean they don't want this to be a Christian country.
Well, that's debatable.
Let's talk to Rabbi Shockett from Mill Hill Synagogue in London. You've been involved in the running of schools, Rabbi Shockett. Is there a benefit for children who are not from a faith to go to a faith school? I mean, is there a benefit in parents lying about it?
Well, you see, I find the conversation itself quite laughable because let's forget about the religion itself for a moment. When I think about a parent sitting in your studio there talking about the fact that the churches deserve it, and so why not? I'll put my kid into such a school. I mean, what a great premise with which to educate your own children on a lie. And one day when that child comes home and says, Dad, I cheated on my exam. Well, son, why did you cheat on your exam? Don't sweat it, Dad. My whole presence in the school is a lie. I mean, that in itself really beggars belief from a purely educational perspective.
Can you blame parents, though, for wanting the best for their children, and if the best is a local faith school, wanting to get there?
I can't blame parents for wanting their children to have a sound education. Of course, then it begs the question about why faith schools might be leaps and bounds ahead of regular state schools. I know state schools are working at trying to catch up, and they certainly need to try harder to play catch up to the overall standards. But religion itself, is not a free-for-all, and for parents to send their children to any sort of school has to certainly involve, if it is the criteria of the school.
I think there's something quite important that the rabbi is making this distinction between religion and faith. People can fake religion. You can't fake faith. And you also, from the point of view of the priests, who am I to judge the condition of any one of my congregation's hearts and their spirits before God? It's not my role, nor is it possible to do. You can't legislate for that.
No, Peter, you wholeheartedly endorse the point that Rabbi Shockett made there, that parents are teaching their children.
So fundamental. Children learn
lying.
above all by example.
Are they not?
If they see their parents cheating, then they will learn to cheat, and it's the most extraordinarily irresponsible thing to do, to cheat in front of your children this way, particularly to cheat for advantage, which is the over other people, which is a particularly nasty form of it. I think the punishment that these parents deserve is for their children actually to grow up as Christians and to forgive them for the terrible thing that they have done.
It's not cheating if the church is opening up their ministry and their service to families to say, look, we have something to offer and we are here to serve you. And, you know, I think of my goddaughter who didn't grow up in a church-going family. When she was 12 years old, she went to do a school project in her local rural church, ended up being so interested in it, I don't quite know how, there was no other children there. She got the whole family going to church, and at the age of 12, she decided to be baptised and then confirmed, and is now a committed Christian.
Could I just make a point to Joanna, because I think that the difficulty is I can quite see that there might be unintended advantages for the church in this, but I really don't think it's possible for a minister of the church to tell people to bear false witness, which is what or to say that it is all right to do so. It's pretty high in the commandments that you can't do that.
Okay, John Cox is former Director of Education for Faith Schools and retired Archdeacon. John, is it useful to have them in even if their parents don't believe, or is it simply a lie that you find offensive?
I find it difficult for the integrity of the person, but to have children who are from non-faith school parents or families is part of the distinctive nature of a Church of England school. We're there for the whole community as well as for those members of the church. And part of the distinctiveness of a Church of England school is that it is open and inclusive to those of faith, those of other faiths, and those of non-faith.
But so how come parents feel they have to fake it in order to get in then?
Well, because they want the best education for their children. But just some facts need to be said. Less than half of Church of England schools have control on their admissions policy. The rest are governed by local authority admissions. And Derek Hatton is wrong to say that church schools don't pay anything. All aided schools have to pay 10%.
I didn't say they didn't pay anything, I said they pay 10%. 90% of the total cost comes from the government, they pay 10%.
They pay 10% of capital costs.
Neil Hamilton is still with us in his role as a former faith school teacher. Is the discriminating on the basis of faith keeping standards up, and are faith schools worried about losing those pushy parents?
Well, I'm entirely in favour of faith schools, and I think that they give a proper moral grounding to children. I'm not against the church discriminating in favour of its own at all. Like in a country where the education system was entirely funded by individuals themselves rather than by the state, this wouldn't be an issue, of course. But because the state takes so much from us in taxes, people can't afford to do that. And therefore this issue of public policy intrudes. But otherwise, we wouldn't think it exceptional at all.
Can I just make a point before about on the sort of the lying and the teaching by example? I'm a great believer in that. But at the end of the day, I don't think the lying of going into school in that way is where the lie comes from. The lie comes from where the vast majority of church schools know very well the parents are playing the game in order to get there, and all you're doing is playing the game with them.
Well,
and of course, if one of my kids came home and said to me, "We've cheated an exam," I wouldn't sit there and say that is the same thing. Of course, it's not the same thing. I think what that shows is the bankruptcy of that side of argument that actually resorting to those. And Peter here is nodding away because last he had someone who was agreeing with him.
You wouldn't like being told that it was the same thing because it would put the responsibility on you, but it would still be true, and it's not really possible, is it, for the church schools to put these people through some kind of inquisition to discover whether they really believe. It's not the school's fault or the vicar's fault. It's only the parents' fault for doing it. And I stress this again. If these people think that atheism is so wonderful, why don't they set up atheist schools, get the government to fund them, and see if anybody else wants to come to them? And if they get oversubscribed, then we'll know that atheist schools are terrific. If not, why don't they consider it possible Christian schools are better because they're Christian, and that they might actually be wrong in
Peter,
their beliefs?
There are plenty of non-religious schools which are oversubscribed.
Well, that's not the point that's being discussed here.
How about forgetting about atheism and Christian having proper state schools properly funded?
In this particular case, it is in very many communities the case that if you want a good primary education, then it is the church schools that provide it. That is not a coincidence.
We should be celebrating that, actually. I think underneath all of this is this sort of paranoia about, the place that faith has in our society altogether. And I think, there's a greater discussion to be had about that. Actually, why can't you be generous enough to just celebrate the good that Christian faith and the church brings to our society?
I can't celebrate, for example, what church schools do to people. I mean, it breeds a discrimination, a hatred, like you're seeing in Oldham, like you saw not so many years ago here in Belfast, where one parent was throwing stones at a young kid going to school because he went to the wrong church school. That's what church schools breed in people.
With the last word on this.
That is not faith. That's just human nature hiding behind a smokescreen of religion.
And I want to let you know that your text poll votes are in. Right at the beginning of the programme this morning, we asked, is an immoral press our fault? And while we've been discussing, you've been voting, so let's bring you the result of that. You told us 71% of those who texted in says, yes, it is our fault. 29% say no. So 71% of people take it on the chin, Derek.
Yeah, fine. I mean, it's one of those polls that happen. Sometimes they go one way, sometimes they go the other way. And you see, an awful lot of people don't want to accept, and I understand why they don't, that somehow it's their fault for reading it. Because just as they've been fed time and time again, that they should read that nonsense and those lies, equally, when it comes to it and say, oh, well, it wasn't my fault I got to this position, it was someone else's fault. And fine, no problem with that.
Reverend Joanna Jepson.
We need to be thinking about what we collude with. This is a question of power, integrity and responsibility. And we have to ask ourselves now, at this break point, are we going to collude in the future with the next publication that comes out too?
Peter?
Well, the press can't on its own remoralise society, but it does need doing, and the press can help. And some of it, I think, does try a bit, and it gets a lot of criticism when it does. And we're accused of moral preaching when we do, but I think the more moral preaching we do, the better it will be for everybody.
You can continue that debate on our website.